What's going on, beautiful people? J4 family and community. Welcome to a Sunday. Hope that your day was wonderful, that you had a chance to clean your house to your perfect music, to your tone, the way you like to set things off to close out a week and open up a new week. It's been a minute since I've been on the microphone. Thought I'd force myself to get on here. I don't know if YouTube creators, if y'all go through these blocks where you try to figure out relevant content to share that's thematic with what you do. J4 Conversations initially started as a parenting channel, two sons, two fathers chopping it up about life. And then we did a piece on biracial identity, and that blew up. And so I've been in this space for a little bit and am enjoying the space. Good to see you on Common Sense, Jose Negron. Good evening. Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you. Yeah, so it's been a minute, y'all. It's been a minute. I've about exhausted all the data that I can come across in the biracial space. And I created sort of a piece that talked about the realities of becoming a distinct biracial group, community, and or culture. I think the pathway to a culture must first come from a community. Community is built out of commonality. And beautiful folks listening in, certainly there is a commonality by way of birth when you're born to two parents of different cultures, particularly in the biracial space, which tends to mean, or if you were to designate that mulatto, black parent, white parent, in the production of a mixed or biracial child. I am such a human configuration, born in 1968 to a black father from a military background, Creole cat out of New Orleans, and a European French mother. In 1968, there were not too many of us categorically. About 1% of human beings were biracial, at least in the US. And so we pathwayed into a blackness, or at least I'm black identifying even today, although the conversation emerging as it is with the biracial community is fascinating to me. Today's numbers that simply warrant a new sort of distinction, or at least a recognition within a blackness or within a whiteness or within both combination, that the biracial community will continue to grow. And so the question of what is it? What is it, beautiful family, and how does it form itself as a community to praise, celebrate, protect, assert, and continue to put forth biracial kids who have a high sense of themselves and they have a high way of being in the world? If you are a white parent with a black spouse that you produced a child with, hopefully that is through marriage, but you have a unique baby in front of you, a person that will enjoy the beauties of both cultures, but at the same time will feel at times on the margins of both culture and sometimes without a culture, right? And so, as the adults, the young people who are in these biracial YouTube streets putting in mad work of self declaration, self assertion, self identity, they're asking for a way to, they're not asking, they're asserting to the broad populace a newness by my sense of definition. I admit I'm 54 years old. I didn't know y'all was in the YouTube streets like this. It's fascinating to me, as I've said before. Shout out to the Mulattos. Shout out Mulatto Vanguard. Appreciate you, brother. It it's fascinating to me. I believe we're on the dawn of a social anthropological immersion of something new. I can't quite say a culture just yet, but at least comparatively to other cultures, and that might be something to explore, right? Does the biracial grouping and whatever that becomes something on the macro at large level, can it constitute itself as a culture? I don't know. Culture is a very big word. It's a very broad word. It's, to me, suggests a glue. My understanding of culture would be Latino culture, black culture, white culture in its nuance, Chicano, Asian Pacific American, basically children who come from an ancestry that's tied to a country, people that come from a community that's tied to an original language, people that come from a community that has a certain homogeneity kind of to it. And so there's different kinds of things that they anchor in, right? Because biracial has so many different kind of configurations, so many different kinds of intra nuance. How does it find glue? How does it find glue to bond itself, from which it can gain instruction and then move forward to solve its own problems and to assert itself celebratorially into the broad beauties of all cultures and communities that are out there. So once again, J4 Conversations, chopping it up with you on a Sunday. I see some energy here in the chats. Let me acknowledge that. And then I want to get to the first question, y'all. And that kind of is, I'll bring that up in a moment. But we got biracial people who create their culture around 24, 25. Huh? I feel you. Biracial gentlemen, I definitely want to hear your input on this conversation because you've actually given it a year. That's what, shoot, one about 300, about 400 days to be in 24, about less than 1,000 to be in 25. That's a very accelerated time frame. So I'd like to learn more, biracial gentlemen, as to how you would identify the culture. All right, we're developing culture as we speak. It will take time. Yeah. Language, land, beliefs, custom, traditions. Boom. All right, you're getting ahead of my question, but I feel you. There are many subgroups among mixed people, right? And that's kind of the challenge, Jose, because the one thing about culture and its beauty and complexity, it has historically at least an aesthetic to it. You can look out and you can generalize and problematically stereotype, but you can group people, at least in the American landscape, and perhaps that's a part of the problem. But biracial kids might have a phenotype, sort of a hue, a common hue to them that would say, oh, that kid is biracial or mixed with something. But then when you set 10 biracial, beautiful young people in a room, they can have 10 different kind of configurations. So in one aspect, you have to have a macro articulation of biracialness, but then it'll also dissect itself out in sort of even in more drop down kinds of ways. We are already creating culture, no doubt. We're talking about black and white biracials in particular. Yeah. It will be accelerating because the amount of biracial people who will have their hand in it. So is it just numbers and people? Okay, let me get to y'all. I'm speaking about black, white, biracials, mulattoes. Right. All right. So I'm gonna there is an average look if you take all their pictures and get the average. You're absolutely right. All right, so I want to go macro, micro. Okay, I want to go big picture and then drop down into a more nuanced kind of way. And so, the question in the thumbnail was: is it a culture? Biracialities, is it a culture? So that's ultimately the topic that I want to talk about today. But I'm going to drop the link to see if anyone wants to come up. But I'm going to ask the question, and I would love your participation in the chat box, at least to this question here. Not just biraciality, but what is the purpose of culture broadly? What is the purpose of culture broadly? Okay. We'll then dissect that down to is biracial a culture, but we'll juxtapose it against this macro conversation we're about to enter into right now. Okay. The mulattoes are here asserting ourselves. Interlopers need not apply. All right. Quincy Darley, it looks like your first time, man. I don't know, maybe you've been here, but let me read you. It definitely can. Just make sure their identities aren't lost and they don't dismiss the struggles of one side for another. True that. Case studies should be made for multicultural peoples and how they immerse themselves in the dominant society. Yeah, absolutely. If biraciality is to become a culture, it will have to be able to tell a story about itself. How does it tell stories? First of all, it needs to be able to extrapolate data. The U.S. Census designation is a significant platform by which data is examined, analyzed, and articulated about, but it extrapolates based upon how people respond to the census. Once you have a full designation in the census, you can then learn and tell a story about yourself. And that includes case studies. Absolutely. Look at the Arab world, Latin America, Desi peoples who have multi-ethnic societies, and people either align fully with the dominant society, disregarding the struggles of their oppressed ancestors, or completely become autonomous and separate from them. Boom. All right. We got some folks in the group here. All right. The purpose of culture is the sense of belonging. The purpose of culture is the sense of belonging and a background you can claim you are from. Absolutely. To have a group of people who have the same views, they need to be able to support and look after each other. Love the ASU helmet in the background. Former Devil, much love. All right, I see you. Go Sun Devils. All right, Mulatto Vanguard, how you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for letting me jump on here. Good to see you.
You too, brother. It's been a minute. Anything you want to shout out? Any projects you got going on social media before we get started?
Basically, to continue some of the work that you have created, basically moving into the third criteria, the growth trajectory. So pretty soon I'm going to be developing some notes and my thoughts on that, and of course contribute to your findings. So thank you for that.
No, beautiful. And those of you all in the chat, if you're UTent content creators, feel free to put your channels in the chat. All of us are at in a growth phase, and so if we can support each other, beautiful. Those of y'all listening in, if you see a title that has interest to you, check it out. Check it out. And if it's worth a bit of your time, show them some love. Show them some love. Um, Mulatto is actually underscoring something that I think is critically important for folks in the biracial space is to have all kind of voices and styles and ways of being in the biracial YouTube space, but as for many of us who can introduce content, that we can introduce research, we can introduce data that'll help give the conversation talking points. It'll be anchored in a contemporary reality. And as much as you are self-advocating or perhaps dialoguing with other folks who are perhaps new to this, and all of this is sort of new, and they're thinking through some things, as much as we can give personal testimony, as much as we can talk about our own narrative, but if we can anchor that and connect that to broader data sets, I think it helps the glue, it helps the formation and commonality, because we have common rhetoric, common vocabulary, common understanding of data sets, and common language. And those are all things that I think are sort of mutually benefiting. So to begin with the question broadly, Mulatto, and then I'll bring up other folks. But what is the purpose of culture from your perspective broadly?
The purpose of culture is to group people and to identify who is who. So ultimately, broadly, I would say to group people, but there's a lot of components that are involved in that, as we've stated with land, religion, your belief systems, the language, I think would be the crucial key component in many regards, because you can see that with like Latino, Hispanic people. They are definitely grouped within their language, kind of the language component linguistically, but also their beliefs with Catholicism. So there
Mm-hmm.
are those elements as well. So yeah, language, linguistically, their theology, their religious belief systems, and then of course the customs and traditions that they hold. Typically, those customs and traditions are tied to their theology, their religion. But developing a culture is not something that's going to happen overnight. That's obvious, right? But there we got to start somewhere. And this is a new endeavor for me. This is a new journey, I might add, but it's something
Mm-hmm.
that has to be done. It's something that has to be done. Talking to you, you're a couple decades older than me. I'm just in a position
You calling
now.
me old again, Mulatto? You calling me old again?
I apologize about that,
That's
but
all right.
you offer a lot of wisdom and insight that I think it's extremely useful to a lot of us. So that's why I'm very appreciative of what you provide. But I'm looking at things and saying like, man, if I have mulatto children, for the future generations, man, they need to have something that is theirs, their own, that others can't steal and encroach upon.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of us trying to get in to fit into other people's, groups and cultures where they can outgroup us and kick us out and stuff like that. We need to lay the foundation now and build upon it. And it's going to take time. That's kind of my whole thing, is that this is not something that's really going to happen over the next few years. It's going to take a lot of time to build this. But yeah,
Yeah, if you look at any modern culture, one that's sort of unarguably a culture, it is something that happens, over centuries, right? It is something that happens over centuries, but it does have some commonalities to it. If you were to create sort of a list, kind of like what we're doing right here, and juxtapose that on a culture, you might find they have, they're able to check box a number of these. And I think if we're literally saying biracial will become a culture similar to other cultures, then you would suspect that it would have to have some capacity to check these boxes as well. And that's kind of what I really want to explore. All right,
most
Mulatto, hold on one sec. Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add upon that. I agree your whole bullet points here. Definitely the main thing that I would kind of push back against is the whole general label of biracial. It's too broad and ambiguous. It doesn't really say you're kind of your racial configuration. It indicates that you're of two racial groups, right? I know it's kind of a politically correct term that we would hear, black, white, biracial, but mulatto, I look at it as being whole, being one, the fusion between the European and African. So that definitely binds us to kind of a wholeness of being one. People around the planet know what a mulatto means. I've heard it when I walked and I was in Ghana, heard it in Portland, Oregon. So around the planet, people are familiar, even though it's Spanish term, etymologically. It to me, in my understanding, it makes us one, coming from the two kind of dualistic backgrounds. So that's number one. Because when we say mixed race or biracial, it's too ambiguous and broad.
It's
We
too
can't really
broad.
define it. Also, what I want to quickly add is where it says general appearance. You have a question mark there for general appearance. There is a quintessential mulatto presenting look, like you and me. It's funny, we kind of look the same. We're both bald. That's for one. I have a student, you know, just a quick story. I have a student, a Ukrainian woman I teach English to. And it's funny, I showed her the interview that, or the discussion that me and you both had a while
Hmm.
back. And
Hmm.
the first thing she said was like, "Oh, you guys look the same."
Yeah,
That was her
yeah.
first indication. This is a Ukrainian,
She,
Caucasian
she
lady.
said the biracials look the same.
Well, me and you in the
Oh,
in the video, in
oh,
particularly,
okay.
because we're both, bald. I think you were in a cap or something, but
Yeah, I'm
even our
bald.
tone, our tone. What I'm saying is that mulatto people typically we do kind of have a general phenotypical look. Would you agree? I kind of tend to think so.
Yeah, as someone that doesn't want to just, sort of inappropriately fall into broad generalizations, when you get into appearance and start those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, if you look at biracial kids, they're going to have a lightness to them. They're going to have a curly headness to them. They're going to clearly have a phenotype range where you look at them, you say, okay, that cat's not white. There's some heritage in there. There's some African in there. So yeah, no problem. We can take that off. No problem. All right, Mulatto. Let's go to the next question. And then for those of you that want to come up, I'm going to take you through a similar kind of exercise. But what we'll do is we'll build on anything here or allow you to have your own thoughts and processes. Okay, but
Hmm.
given the components of cultures that we're just sort of building out here a little bit, do you believe biracial or mulatto people have this?
You're saying a similar culture at the current moment?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I think a lot of us, and I'm speaking in terms of geography, so in North America or even in the UK. So I guess I could say Western nations, where it's more Anglo-Saxon, white uh, culture, so to speak, English-speaking culture. A lot of us are definitely a lot of times grouped into the black category. So our cultural kind of identity is definitely rooted within blackness.
Hmm.
Some sort in some way or form, even if we have obviously the love the what do you call it, the love source of our white parent or whatnot, or white family members. A lot of us are kind of how do I put this, we're enculturated through a lot of the black kind of customs and black culture.
Hmm.
So that is definitely present in a lot of us. I
Is
don't
there
know if I
consensus among that in the biracial mulatto communities you're interfacing with? Is there consensus on that
I
rooted in a
think so.
blackness?
Well, when you think of the art, like hip hop culture, which in my generation, right, we could say Xers and millennials, hip hop culture is a big thing. So that definitely groups a lot of us together with the music and stuff like that. The colloquialisms, like the phrases and slang, etc., and the humor aspects. Those are some things that I definitely see that groups a lot of us together. As far as that component. But yeah, that's just from like the Western kind of perspective, like I said, North America and like UK. But yeah.
For those of y'all in the chat, I'm vibing here a little bit with Mulatto Vanguard to the broader question: is biracialities, is it a culture? And we just kind of went through a macro exercise as to what is culture, the components of culture, and then do mulatto people have that? Mulatto is advocating yes, but it has to be something more than blackness. Otherwise, it would just make sense as it was in my day to just be black identifying, right? What would you say to that?
Definitely. That's what we're doing right now. The whole, development of crafting kind of a new culture that can be accepted norm by the masses of like mulatto people is definitely something that will take time for people to accept and just uphold. But like you said, the whole pathway to blackness, the whole generational nuance component, as we can see today, I think I would say in America, most of the mulatto people are definitely more so black identified because a lot of people don't feel like they have a third option. They don't have another option to seek like community with. And that's kind of what my whole goal and mission of my channel is, to provide for the public, to let them know you have another option. There's something here for you. You will be accepted here. And we're all kind of discovering this together.
Beautiful. Heading to the chats, the mulattoes light ebonics in comparison, especially when people have foresight about how culture is created. Especially with people that have foresight about how culture is created. Tell me more about that, the mulattoes. And then right now we don't have a culture; we're still culturally black. I think that's kind of what you're saying. Um,
Well,
Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. It's
I
your
just really
response.
wanted to respond. I just really wanted to respond to this gentleman's comment, biracial gentleman, because
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea is that, well, we are still culturally black. That's not always the case. A lot of us are been gatekept and kind of outgrouped and pushed out of black culture and associating with hip black, so to speak, because we're not as culturally in tuned to the so-called black culture. That's what happens to a lot of us. We get labeled as being, oh, you're white, you're just a white boy or something like that. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of us go through that because we don't technically fit into the kind of general black culture, as you would say. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of us, we wanted to be at one point. That's what I initially wanted to state. A lot of us, we have wanted to be a part of that black culture, and we face a lot of barriers, realizing, well, wait a second, this is unnatural for me to try to fit into this space where I'm not really myself true authentically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I'm making it sound confusing, but a lot of us have got pushed out of the culture. So now we're in a position where like, okay, we have to develop something of our own, and it's going to take time. It's not easy.
Yeah, to me, that seems to be a general theme where a lot of mulatto kids, biracial kids, they kind of grow up and they test the waters in social circles, and they'll do that in black spaces, mixed, multicultural kind of spaces, but then they'll have a sense of acceptance or lack thereof. For those who perhaps have a greater sense of acceptance, they may tend to have a higher comfort or more stronger footing with the monoracial blackness. But those who are vulnerable to it, not to use a victimized word, but who have some challenges with the perpetual membership because it can always be renegotiated by peer youth people, that they're like, man, forget this bump, it's time to start something new. So that may answer this next question. But mulatto, do you feel mulatto is sort of a subset of blackness, kind of like Creole, or are we talking something completely separate, not separate, something new that genuinely embraces both the love sources?
Definitely. And I like the way you phrased it earlier, like not in this stream, but like a few months ago when we had a chat. Instead of using the word kind of separate, independent, as a standing whole independent kind of union, union or unit from blackness, although definitely still upholding my heritage. Obviously, with me, like, basically am thrilled to travel to Ghana, proud of my heritage, where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't look at it as myself being separate, but we are definitely pushing towards something that's more independent, that can stand on its own, like a self-sufficient community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if that answers it, yeah.
No, absolutely does. Really appreciate that. Biracial gentlemen, feel free to hit that link if you want to come up. Um, so culture in its most effectiveness should be able to mobilize its group, its members, its media, its priorities. It ought to be able to mobilize its priorities, right? Now, this might be the cart before the horse, but what do you think is the number one agenda item for biracial or mulatto culture formation? What do you think is the number one agenda? Well, no, that's a different question. What do you think is the number one agenda for biracial or mulatto peoples from your perspective?
The number one agenda for me, I can say personally, is just letting people know that we're here and developing our own space. That's kind of my whole main mission. Obviously, there's a larger kind of political movement to get classification on the census so we
Hmm.
can be recognized as our own racial group. A lot of us have come to terms and realized that there's been a constructed effort with the federal government to essentially try to make it seem as if we are invisible in a society when we're heavily present. We're all over media, people know who we are, but as a group, it's like we are, as Flowers, puts it, she says it's the segregation of mulatto people with the 1924 Racial Integrity Act, where they took away from us our racial classification on the census being calculated. The reason why it's important because when a government they calculate people based on the census, geography, where they're located, then there's resources allocated for that said demographic. And then, of course, there's representation attached to that. As mulatto people, now I'm speaking in American context because I know we have people listening from other parts, different countries. But so as a mulatto group in America, we do not have proper representation. So we have been denied that based on some of these policies at the federal level, the state level, et cetera. And that's what I think is one of the main agendas that I can see from talking with different people. But it's not as organized as I'd like it at this point because there is a lot of subversiveness. There's a lot of subversion and subversiveness happening within these so-called mixed race spaces. And number one is the whole terminology. When people use broad and ambiguous terms like biracial, mixed, they allow other people who aren't our exact heritage configuration into the discussion. That's number one,
Mm.
because a lot of us can't come up with a name to call ourselves. That's number one. Number two, there's a sexual component aligned to that. Like there was a law that was just passed, the Freedom of Marriage Act, and they combined the interracial relationships and then of course the same sex marriage relationships component. So there is an agenda at play of people who do not want us to create our own group. But I said a lot there.
No, no, it's very enlightening and informative to me. Last question, and then I'll see if you have any last thoughts here. Dr. Went, who's been, just a number one supporter from day one, even when we were primarily in the parenting space, and all this does relate to parents. The 17% of all newlyweds are interracial. 38.8 million people are biracial, and the numbers are just going to grow. And so, white mothers, black fathers who produce biracial kids, mulatto kids, it's helpful to know a little bit about what's going on in the community. Maybe you'll find some new information for thought process and conversation, but also ways to engage your beautiful seeds. Dr. Went asks, how does the need or the ability to code switch tie into biracial culture, or should it be a fusion of being one? Can we truly be a fusion of one? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. That's a question for me, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
For sure. What I like to say, is even through hybrid vigors, mentioned this before, the cultured mulatto, there's actually a developed concept called the cultured mulatto. When I look at someone like Andrew Tate, okay, for all intents and purposes, I think he represents that well. He identifies himself as mixed race. He upholds his culture. He's very proud of his father, who's African American. His mom is Caucasian from
Hmm.
England. So
Hmm.
he refers to himself as mixed race, even though he's kind of, I guess you can say, white presenting. But I feel like he could, well, he doesn't really look white, but that's neither here or there. I feel like he's a person who can code switch, but he's definitely speaks very eloquently. I don't know if I kind of went on a little bit there, but the code switching component for us to continue to do that to create our own. I mean, we're in the whole process right now of creating our own. But code switching is something we've all been able to do and still do. I'm pretty sure you do as well, J4. You seem like you're very eloquent. You have a pretty large lexicon, the type of vocabulary, from the academic realm that you come from. And also, you still have some of the kind of Black colloquialisms, like I can tell speaking to you. So we understand the same lingo. But yeah, code switching is, yeah.
Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you. Last two questions. You love your mama?
Oh, is that for me?
Yep.
Of course I love my mom. Yeah, she's probably my favorite person, of course.
You love your pop?
I haven't talked to my pop in a long time, but definitely I really appreciate the time that I spent with him. I'm very thankful for my father, for the things that we did, when I was a child, going fishing, going on long bike rides to Huntington Beach, going to the arcade. I'm very thankful for the parents that I have. I just haven't talked to my father in a long time, but I'm very thankful that he is my dad, even though I haven't spoken to him in a while, because I've
Yeah.
done a lot of great things with him. And there's a lot of people out there. You'll talk to a lot of, mulattoes or, biracials, etc., who they've been grew up in the foster care system or they don't know their parents. And
Right.
I really feel for them. And that's why I think it's important we develop a culture, a community, a network so we can help some of these people. Um, and because I think I'm privileged, I had both of my parents early on as a kid, so I got to spend time with both. And I'm very thankful that I got to go fishing with my dad and do that stuff. So I love both of them. I'm very thankful. Yeah.
Powerful, powerful. If it's to be that you and your father reconnect, I hope it happens through his initiative or yours. But that is certainly personal. I only asked that question because I know a little bit. We've talked about that before, but I use that metaphorically. Beautiful folks listening and in, as you become something distinct, and I believe it will happen. That that loving both love sources is critically important, not only in what the biracial mulatto community becomes, but also in the creation process, because if you can move towards whatever newness you become with a certain love, literally, verbally, thought processes where you have a certain delicacy on how you talk about why you want to become something new, please anchor that in a love for both love sources. Mulatto, anything else? Any questions for me? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, most definitely. Like, I'll just add that just the whole nature of being balanced, of being well established and balanced, and passing down that love for the next generation, right? So embracing that family unit, embracing our culture. So yeah, there's a whole lot to be said there, and it's healthy. It just to be balanced as well, right? So I just want to say thank you. It was a pleasure to talk with you again, and then I'll talk to you soon. So for sure.
Appreciate you, brother, as always.
All
All right. All right. The back end is open. We can go through a similar exercise building upon these things. Dr. Went, how does the need or the ability to code switch tie into biracial culture, which would mean that based upon environment where you're at, you adjust accordingly and you pull from the wholeness that you are to sort of find cachet in the immediate moment, or should it be a fusing of being one? I think code switching is something that's all people should learn, because there's a sophistication that goes with understanding where and who you are in a given space. I do much of my work about understanding time, place, and space, and that if you can be clear as to which identity ought to be dominant and clarity about what your intent is, success is most likely to occur. That happens in social settings, particularly for mulatto or biracial kids. But what I hear in the voices in the young people here is that it ought not be code switching. It is ought to be sort of the multiplicity, the duality, the triality, the quadrality of mulatto kids or biracial kids, because they've lived a life exposed to two cultures in a full breath, and that is who they are now in singular form. That it's literally code switching, but it is more a manifestation of the singularity that is them. That's my kind of musings on it. All right. I don't see anyone in the back just yet. Biracial gentlemen, come on up. Hybrid, I think I saw you in there. Feel free to come on up. Let's read some of these chats. And if there's questions you all have, feel free to put them in there as well. Where are we at? Example, the first president is black, not biracial. Yeah. Example. Okay, I thought you might have said that in the inverse. Okay. When Barack was running, I said, hey, his he has my vote, or his my vote is his to lose. But I saw him, kind of as a black man. I certainly, if you're biracial, you're black. That was just the way I kind of came of age. But I hear contemporary conversation that saying that President Barack Obama is biracial, not black. But I think one of the things I've heard that best answers that is that a biracial or a mulatto kid is both. That they're both. That is the uniqueness of them. They are both black and they are both white, and that they'll change identity, posture, and position as the circumstances and their current state of existence warrants. But at the end of the day, they literally are a combination of two or more racial identities. And so it is legitimate to say, and y'all can certainly push back, that President Barack Obama, former president, is black, and President Barack Obama, former, is biracial. Now, the other nuance from mental gymnastics is, could you then say he's white by that logic? Huh. All right. Or any music we make, books, or contributed to black culture, or any yeah. So biracial gentleman's asking what I believe will be a controversial conversation is can you claim biracial or mulatto heroes and sheroes and noted individuals of the past, can you claim them as mulatto or biracial, right? Or does that not require some historical evidence of what they called themselves, right? Could you just arbitrarily sign them up for the biracial team? Or would that not require some sense of uh authentication as to what do they consider themselves? Or are we just saying it's a color game now, that if you're biracial and there was some mixed blood in you somehow, that we're just going to claim you for ourselves? I think that'll be an interesting one. All right, hybrid, I see you in the back. I'm coming. If we settle for being a subset of blackness that will not have our own voice, will be drowned out. Okay. If we settle for being a subset of blackness, we will. Okay. Let me scroll down here. All right, I'm gonna pull you up. Hybrid Vigor, how are you?
How's it going?
I'm well, man.
Not too
Anything you
bad.
want to shout out or share by way of your social
Um.
media or projects?
Oh. Well. Yeah. There's of course my channel. There's my channel. It's already down there. The Mulattoes. It's,
Okay, you already put it down there.
yeah.
All right, so today we're talking about biracialities. Is it a culture? So Mulatto Vanguard before you,
I was here. Yeah.
he, okay, he indicated some things here. What are components of most cultures? Would you add anything here or
Um.
question anything?
The question is a bit awkward. Like, what's the purpose of a culture? I mean, because sometimes there's latent purposes. There's intentional purposes. Like there's purposes that we intentionally created something for, and some things become purposes like latent purpose. Like we didn't intend it, but it became a secondary purpose that it became useful for other things. For example, you go to school. School is a place to learn, but university is also a place to meet people. So
Sure.
that would be a latent function. That would be a side, right?
Okay.
So culture. I mean, it's one of the most generalist concepts, really, right? It's like one of the most ubiquitous for me. I guess you could say, yeah, like shared customs, traditions, customs. I think would be the most emblematic of a culture. Of course, language would be like one of those customs, but I see us as being probably mostly English, pretty much. I think English is really becoming the universal language right now. Everybody, and even like in those other Asian countries, they all want to learn English, right? In Japan. So I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I don't see us going too farther from that, especially if we're going to be from different places. The people are most likely to have learned English and their own language.
Hmm. What are some things that are maybe even hinting at the custom space as it relates to biraciality? Are we even at the dawn of anything that?
Well, the word, I don't really like the word biraciality too much, just because it's not
That's my word.
like
That's my
he
word.
said, because it doesn't say anything about our race. Like there's Chin Indians, right? They have Chin Indians who are they're Chinese and half Indian, neither
Hmm.
of which is our race, but they're also biracial. And they have their own flourishing business in Indonesia. They have their own flourishing communities and cultures. And so, yeah, that's why that word, we like the black or white, that's why we kind of been using the word mulatto a lot lately, because we like it. It's visible.
Hmm.
Everybody knows what it means. Like when you say that, there's no confusion right now. Yes, in the black community, we've come to think of biracial typically as black or white, but other communities don't necessarily jump to the black white. Some white people might jump to Asian white, where to us, we tend to automatically think black white, but others don't necessarily see that. So it could be when you say mulatto, everybody knows what it means. And even Of course, the term has a controversy aspect, but that also works in our favor indirectly because it
Right.
also creates buzz and visibility. People hear that, it creates, oh, they want to hear who's using this term, and it kind of creates visibility for us.
Yeah, I was just looking for a name to kind of be catchy and associated with the channel. So biracial and then realities, right?
Yeah, I get it.
Biracialities.
Okay.
But I acknowledge, yeah, if you want to be more succinct with it, and maybe it's time for a more concise language, mulatto at least is the current.
Because that's the majority of us, really, right? In
Yeah,
this,
yeah. But talk
like,
to me on the
and I don't mean
customs.
in a puritanical sense. I mean, if somebody's like mostly mulatto, but they might have like 10% Indian or something, it's not like, I like, as long as like most of what they consist of are those two things. That's like the you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, talk to me
Yeah.
about the customs. Do you know of any customs that are
Well, I
kind of
was already pointing out a
emerging?
little bit there how we tend to have a little bit of like even the whiter ones tend to have some of the ebonics. They tend to every once in a while, say a few things that are typically black. Like they just have to compared to the black culture. Well, it might be a little bit more heavy ebonics, but right, even though in our circles, like we're not that many of us are ebonics. Some of us are, but yeah, you could just tell that it's not like there is a fusion of the white and the black culture. It's not. I wouldn't say it's all. One of the problems I think it appears to a lot of people sometimes it's only black, because sometimes we treat white as if the non-culture, like as if it's like the negation of culture. But no, it's definitely. I mean, I'm not. I would say I'm a little like I think I was raised pretty equal. I mean, I was the people I would say around were probably majority white groups. Like they would have been like maybe 60% white, maybe like 10-15% black, right? And then other kind of mix. But it's still although locally I wasn't necessarily surrounded by blacks. I was still very like media wise, very like every black music, black.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would identify as black, and my mom raised me as black. Black music, black comedy, especially the whole history of black comedy, like Richard Pryor, like the old stuff.
Oh yeah. I used
I
to have the Richard Pryor records.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Red Fox.
Mhm.
Yeah. I remember the records too. Yeah, the records. Those were the days. Yeah,
So
so I still have all that, even though there's some proximity. Like I went to university, right? I'm a little more educated than a lot of the others around here.
let me ask you here, Hybrid. Do you believe, given our, highly scientific research right here? I'm joking, but do you believe mulatto folks have these elements, or in part of what might constitute a culture?
Well, I mean, to even see that, you have to look at some place where we are concentrated, right? And we don't really have that many concentrated places. I mean, I would say, the best example we even have is just literally our online space, and I would say it seems to be both at the bottom ends of both cultures, to be honest, so far. But but there is definitely a white and black thing going on there, right?
Right.
Although me and Vanguard both get called white, even we're not that white, but we still get called white compared to the other ones. And and some of us are darker, and we are trying to get together. It is like this fusion, and there's a little bit of like there's still a lot of little things you never expected. Like there's sometimes a little bit of a divide between the biracials with black mothers and white fathers
Hmm.
versus the biracials with the
Yeah,
white,
it's nuanced on all different kind of levels.
especially
Right?
if there's bitterness on any side. Like there's almost like I find that, at least, but I'm starting to notice now, not my generation, but what I'm seeing now, what they're doing right now, is there is a bitterness. There's a bitterness that's being passed on. And we've noticed there being a bias towards the opposite side, the ones that typically have more.
Yeah, and not to cut you off as I cut you off, apologies. That's kind of what I was alluding to when I was chopping with Mulatto Vanguard, is that as you continue to go and grow and become, which I think is inevitable, the numbers are just warranting it, and the passion by which the biracial community is self-advocating. But the breakaway, hopefully there's some internal inward thought and self-process on how will you make that transition, and that despite the literal relationship to mom, dad, whatever the black white configuration is, you're also still coming through a sort of cultural maternal home for many people, not all, as the chat is demonstrating. That was blackness. And so how do you then transition to whatever you're going to become while being mindful of preserving whatever decorum and positivity and healthy relationship with blackness primarily, but also with a sense of whiteness as well, because I'm sure there's critique there. Yeah.
I think that it's something that will and there's yeah, people get accused of the racism too different depending on what side you're
Yeah.
different. People can be a bit more but yeah, we never expected that. I'm sorry, what was your question again? Just that
No,
last
I'm
part.
transitioning. Hold on one sec. Yes, baby. Now my daughter's looking in, probably what the hell I'm yelling about. Hybrid, tell me, what do you feel is the number one agenda? Ought to be the number one agenda for mulatto peoples.
Well, I don't think we have a people until we can unite with our women. I don't think we really have power until we can be our own parents, right? As long as we are kind of, it's almost like we are born in a kind of confusion and we don't really have. And by the time we get older, like I came into this identity later. I was identified as Black for most of my life, right? But I kind of came into this full identity and this full separation, particularly with experience that I had in the community with all this colorism and the "you're not Black," all the biracials are not Black kind of videos that started popping up. It kind of felt like pushback, and so I'm just coming to that now. But other people are going to go through that similar pattern where at first they're going to be confused and they might be Black for a while, and in order to start from afresh, start afresh, you have to have been your own parents. It has to be somebody who's already completed that, gotten out of that phase, and now has children that are going to be similar and can pass on that knowledge of how it is to live in that kind of right. And so, even right now, we have a group where we're not necessarily, we're very weakly connected biologically to the women, to our own women. They're very fragmented, right? We're not, because of the fact that we're surrounded by the other two dominant groups. There's always like a larger pool to choose from in mates, making it very hard for us because we're rarely even together. But you also have to be the perfect. You just also have to happen to be the perfect, right? You might be like around 20 other kinds of women before you're around one of those, and that one has to be one. So it's really hard. We don't have that physical, literal, biological connection yet. Where you have like legends like that, it's passed down like a legacy kind of. We don't have that set up in any way.
Yeah, well, a core transmitter of culture is going to be intra-family.
Yes.
Literally
So
the
a
family, right?
primary thing is to get us dating more with each other, and through that, especially through the children, will be that first really strong-footed generation.
Beautiful, beautiful. I want to go to Dr. Went's question, but I think biracial gentleman who's dropping some dimes in here. Biracial people becoming is the same concept as moving out of your parents' house as an adult, huh? Yeah, I like that metaphor there, right? Because the assumption is you grow and you become unto your own, and you take with you family values and you replicate certain kind of traditions in your own home, and your spouse adds another element of value to that, and you become of but yet something different, right? To me, the transition part is something I just always want to underscore. Speak your truth, speak your frustrations, but just be mindful of preserving, in this case, the love sources, right? Powerful. I don't know if you have any information on this here, Hybrid, but Dr. Went, she asked, are there recent researchers in the U.S. collecting data on biracial identity? And then she mentions, I do disagree in several comments that mulatto is a term we all know since I've relocated to the South, and some people do not use that term. So in her life's experience, mulatto is not as predominant. So are you aware of any research and any comments on the mulatto spreading perhaps as a common reference point for distinct Black-white heritage?
Well, I don't. I mean, I do have a lot of papers actually regarding identity, and we had a whole like identity series for like 2 weeks. We just did stuff on identity, but it's used beyond here too. It's used beyond here, even if you go to like Africa or something. They know what the mulatto
Right.
is. If you go to they know what the mulatto is. And I mean, even if you haven't heard it being, because yes, it has not been used here in America, because for some reason only in America it was considered offensive. However, it was considered offensive by Black people more than it wasn't biracial people. It was made offensive by Black people, and I believe it does have to do with To keep us in. There was a point where like there was I think it does have to keep us in the group. There's a fear, and you might hear it. There was always this fear of there being a buffer class, and sometimes it's kind of conspiratorial that the white men are creating us to create a buffer class to keep
Right.
black people down. And I think historically, when you look at the history, inevitably we do inevitably when that happens, we have inevitably always went into our own group. And I think there's a fear of that, and that's part of it being banned. Like even in the same way that that woman she's an artist who named herself Mulatto, and she had to change her name. She named
Mm-hmm.
herself Mulatto, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she got pressure to have to change it, and that was offensive. But the people who were offended were black women, right? It wasn't like there wasn't mulattoes that were offended. It wasn't mulattoes saying change it. It was black women in particular, not even
Mm-hmm.
black men. And I think it had to do with they didn't want like the credit of the music to be seen as
Something
going to the other
different.
side. They wanted to go to the black side. They wanted to be seen as black, and they were pressuring her like you can't say that you're black because you rap and say I'm black, and they would say well you can't say that if you're. It was kind of that kind of thing, and she got pressured out of. But yeah, the offense wasn't about the word being offensive. It was more offense. I think there's a little bit of offense sometimes that people might think you're better. Black people that might think you're better because what they're saying is you're identifying with your white, right? To say you're mad, you're saying, well, I also identify with this part, and by doing that, you're kind of they don't like that. That's a kind of right.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
change.
and yeah, that's the
You
delicate.
can be proud to be black, but you can't be proud to be white, right?
Yeah,
You can't say the other one, right?
that's the delicacy of the identity formation, right? A lot of times, identity is not self announced. It is the opposite of, or it is the opposite of, right? So, one way identity is formed is you tell a narrative and a story about another group of people, and then inherently you become everything the opposite of what you just described, right? That's how you create group hierarchy because you tell myths, narratives, half truths, lies about a group of people. That becomes their inherited stereotype. And by default, if you control the narrative, you then have the better of the identity formation. This is a delicate space, right? I would say, as you all are, I don't know if you're organized in any kind of way, but at some point, the research and the thinkers, when they talk about identity formation, would want to acknowledge that as a threat, right? If you simply are wanting to become, because the numbers are now warranting, you're seeing yourself represented largely in the broader populace, you've had some lived experience in monoracial spaces where you just did not find place and space, but then what do you become, right? And do you repeat old habits of boogeyman telling, or do you find a different way to assert yourself? It's going to get tense. It's going to get tense, but that is a threat to a perpetual label that might be assigned to mulatto or biracial communities. I don't know, thoughts there, and then we'll wrap up with you.
Well, sometimes they might look at it as rejecting them. There could be a sense of like you think you're better because why wouldn't you be black then? If you're saying that you're something other than that, then you must think it's because you're better. And the only thing to be is because you're half white. Therefore, it can only be your whiteness. That's what I've gotten. It can only be that it's because you accept your white side. It's or that and it's because you think you're better because of it that you would identify as mulatto. That's the kind of backlash I've had. Somebody say that.
Mm-hmm. Mulatto says, I agree with hybrid. It's not the word they're upset about, it's the fact that they would identify independently from them by using the term. Yeah. Yep. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, Mulatto, I'm going to give you the last, I'm sorry, hybrid. I'm going to give you the last comment or question from me. I've asked you the three. You seem to support with nuance the components, and then you feel the agenda. It ought to be families where uh, nuclear families are producing and inserting values that would lift up biracial or mulatto-ness in a unique kind of
And to
way,
carry the tradition over,
carry
to carry
traditions.
our traditions
Hmm.
and wealth.
And by way of creation, if you could unravel and go back to, when did X culture become defined and what became their traditions and what became their rituals, right? At some point, beautiful family, some charismatic person who had some authority and power in the space simply made it up. They simply made it up. So I'm recommending, as I do with my family, in your nuclear family environments, largely around the classroom of the house, which is the dinner table, make shit up. And you can make up rituals, you can make up mantras, you can add value statements that complement whatever your spiritual deity tells you to say. Make things up, and then you initiate it as the founding mother, father, whatever the case may be, and then lo and behold, your children introduce that into their house, then your grandchildren, and then millennia down the road, when you are long and gone, something that you made up with thought and care and alignment now is manifested. At some point, you're going to need to make things up. All right, Mulatto, last words or question, if you have one for me, brother.
No, I'm good. That's good.
I appreciate you
Thanks for
coming
having
up.
me up.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
See
y'all.
you later. All right.
All right, we are going to go through the comments right quick, and then we will see where that takes us. Uh, Magic Biracial wants you to get at him, biracial gentleman, afterwards. Yes, family is the key to success in having our own community. Hey, Magic, good to see you. Appreciate you being over here. I agree with hybrid. We need families. Biracial men and biracial women making families are the key. Make rituals up that are meaningful. Great strategy. Yeah, Dr. Will, I just made the thing up. We got a family prayer that asserts a number of values that were important to me at least 25 years ago. And today, any one of them can recite it. Now, I'll be interested, though, when I go to their house for whatever reason, if they bust it out. I don't know. I don't know if it'll last past one generation, but they know it. And every time they said it, it put a certain kind of energy into the environment, put a certain kind of energy into their being. All right. Yes, we making up our own traditions, values, and cultures. Yes, we got to be creative. Yep. A pure biracial influence. Wow. Let me just clarify here. I am biracial by birth, black identifying. These folks, not these folks, but the beautiful folks in here they're telling their story in very assertive kind of ways, and they're doing it in sort of a biracial and proud kind of way, which is interesting, which is beautiful. Mulatto Vanguard, excellent discussion today. All right, I think we're getting towards the end. I think culture talk is soon for us. I think the culture talk is too soon, right? Sometimes it can derail, right? And that's critically important, right? And say, hey, first things first, because you can get lost in the ethereal, you can get lost in the ideological, philosophical, and that maybe there's some first things first, which is kind of why I wanted to share. What do y'all think your primary agenda ought to be? Right? What do you think your primary agenda ought to be to help kind of start with first things first? All right. I think in these biracial spaces, we get ahead of ourselves. Got to start somewhere. All right, beautiful family. I'm going to stay on just a couple of more seconds, a couple more minutes in case folks want to sign out or ask a question. Culture is generated by the character of the people, right? Culture also looks like something. Culture also looks like something. And as you're having conversations, especially as loose as they can get, right, and as sort of fiery as they can get, again, have some history takers, some researchers. But what are the components of most culture? If you're seeking cultural identity, you can learn and understand what other cultures categorically have, and then you can see how do you tell your story, how do you check those particular boxes, or because biracial or mulatto-ness is relatively new in the construction way it is in the United States, and the premium the the inevitable growth, significant pace by which the community is growing, it may become something new, something that does not mirror step by step the patterns and categories of other cultures. Maybe it becomes something new, but it's also helpful to think through within due time, when and in proper order, what is your ultimate destination point, right? And is it to literally become a traditional kind of culture over a period of time, or is the priority simply to have a high sense of community, maybe not the threshold of culture, but a high sense of community that ultimately you can have your social circles extended from, and then maybe destination points and organized points for your beautiful children to come of age around people who share similar identity, heritage backgrounds as them. All right, couple more. There is fluidity in this as well as it relates to identity, right? Yeah, you'll go in and out. You'll go in and out. Well, sometimes you may be monoracially identifying. Sometimes you're arduently both. Sometimes you just want to walk away from it and you go lean on other kinds of identities. The thing is, culture is complex and it will take time. Yep. We have to get along before we even think about culture. Yeah. Or at least a certain collegiality for a broader purpose. Just because y'all share similar birth backgrounds don't mean you like each other, right? That comes through time together, tasks. That happens in very small, micro kind of spaces. And then eventually it can grow if there's ways to gather beyond geography for whatever reasons make sense, whether they're celebratorial, educational, professional, common, maybe cooperative economics, whatever the case may be. We need to start with reclaiming our identity and building community based on shared values and culture. Heteronormative values are family values. Okay. Obviously, all kinds of thoughts and identity politics at play here. Our culture is fighting with other biracial people and being pro black. All right. And last but not least, our culture is having an identity debate. All right. Well, hopefully, y'all got some good moderators. Hopefully, people are coming to it with good faith. And hopefully, people are, I'm sure, emoting with emotion and personal quasi trauma tied to that. And if it's cathartic and healing to do that, then that's the first phase of solidarity is to come together for a common reason. And a lot of time that's anger and that's frustration. But you can't perpetually stay in frustration and anger because otherwise that becomes counterproductive to formation. And finally, thank you for the insight discussion, Alonzo. Appreciate that. I'm just going to tell the people my government name. And we have culture of conflict since we are born of two different communities that have been in conflict. All right, beautiful family. I want to thank you guys for coming in. If you find value in the subject matter, please tell some folks about J4 Conversations. If you want to even be graciously supportive of what we're doing here, give me a little incentive, a little bit of motivation. For me, that's subscriptions. When I see that number go up, I'm like, oh man, I need to get back in here and do this thing, right? I need to give me a little fire, give me a little motivation. Give me a little motivation. But then when sometimes you get, you might get 2 subscribers and then one falls off and you take it personally. Like, what's going on? You take it personally, like, what's going on? I thought y'all was out of here. I'm not black enough. I'm not white enough is our culture. That's our literature for the last 10 years. I'm not black enough. That's a deficit mindset, biracial gentlemen. I'm not black enough, not white enough. We got to retell that story, flip it on its head. We need more literature going forward. Yeah, definitely. I meant to say family values are heteronormative values. Okay. And sub, thank you, Magic Mulatto. Yes, that's basically what I was saying. That is the fuel. That is the food of content creators. I see some folks that put those what do they put up there? The super chats. Well, they got four subscribers. You asking for cash? No. Let's follow the rules, get the 1,000 and get your 2 cents for the value add campaign, whatever the case may be. But the food of of small YouTube creators is subscription. So anything you can do in that regard. And then also, of course, if you have a channel, if you are a YouTube content creator, feel free right now to drop your title in the chat and folks take a look at that. And if you think there's value, if you think there's some gestures of goodwill, some reciprocity, perhaps, support that page. Support that page. We definitely want to help folks grow. All right. All right. My dog's barking. We're right up on the hour. I want to thank you guys for coming in. It has been a minute, but I'm glad I got back on. I can't say if I'm going to be on anytime soon. I'm taking a family trip, taking the seeds to Puerto Rico. We have a lot to celebrate over here in the J4 family. On that note, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. Love, love, love.